Suddenly aware that the room was filled with pale sunlight, Bigger Thomas's internal flame is reignited upon his waking. In the brightness, he is harshly reminded of the horrors of the preceding night as the yellow glare illuminates his inescapable life and fate which simply existed. This cruel light pulls him out of his stuporous fantasy of peace and into the blunt and devastating reality that he has created for himself. A fire now burns within him as if last night he had picked up a piece of the red-hot furnace and embedded it within himself. This fire and the light calls him to action like the alarm clock that it parallels from the first book. It acts as one of the many enlightening moments for Bigger. He feels an illusion of understanding after his murder of Mary Dalton, masking his shame and guilt around his family with an air of confidence and intellectual, philosophical superiority. He acts as though everyone else is blind to their isolation, meaninglessness, blind to the hole in which African Americans have found themselves, disagreeing for the first time with his previous views of naturalism, acting as though individuals actually have choices in regards to their actions. He treats others with a mystifying sense of pity that he self-righteously feels towards them, representing Wright's analysis of blindness to harsh reality in the sense that those oppressed encompass a certain stillness in the face of their hostile environment. Furthermore, Bigger's internal revelation that Buddy and Vera are blind further accentuates this point, while supplementally characterizing Bigger as an imperceptive narcissist, as he wanted to wave his hand and blot them out. Specifically, Bigger's encounter with Vera at the beginning of Book 2 truly represents how Bigger's id often takes over his entire body, riddling himself with the sexual desire and primitive instincts. Screaming a blood-curdling cry, Vera reminds Bigger that she ain't no dog, and pleads to make him stop looking at her brown legs leading up to her juvenile dress as his Freudian id takes over him like a blanket of guilt. However, his relationship with Buddy is less primitive and more instinctual love, as overwhelming guilt fills his body for his literal buddy. Running outside and softly questioning his brother's fate, Bigger could only muster a frightened whisper in return, for he knew his debt to Buddy, and he understood how his relationship with this boy will haunt him for the rest of his life if it should fall to shambles. He gazed at Buddy in long silence, questioning his next move. Would he jeopardize Buddy's innocence and reveal to him the horror of his murder? No. Instead, Bigger demonstrated true love and responsibility for his buddy as he peeled off a bill and told him to take it and buy something. For, in all trueness, Bigger believes that he will never be a sufficient role model or caretaker for them, and so to avoid failure, he simply abandons them as a big brother, virtually becoming useless to the family. He would rather take the full force of his mother's anger than even attempt to be the role model that he believes he could never fit.
Book 2 has a magnitude of symbolic objects, all with specific and deeper meanings riddled behind them. However, two of the most influential and prevalent symbols are alcohol and the money Bigger stole from Mary's purse the night of the murder. With eyes red from sleep and alcohol, Bigger's life is catalyzed in every aspect when he allows for the cool sting of alcohol to touch his partially open lips. His choices change, his attitude flourishes into primitive male patriarch he is, and his eyes are open with the false sense of reality and the power that coincides with alcohol. The power that devours his soul into a corrupt, sex-driven, and malicious man blinded by its own fate. However, the money he had gotten from Mary's purse also translates this sense of perceived power in the white world, as Bigger classifies poor white folk as stupid. By this logic, the money he now has should help him become more successful and make him an equal to his own. In reality, it only acts as a false sense of security. However, transitioning into Bessie, to her, alcohol acts as a vehicle to suppress her feelings and emotions. Feeling the warmth of alcohol spreading through her veins, Bessie lives and dies in the bottle she holds. Yes, Bessie was blind to the world outside her bottle. It was only an escape from reality into a world of comfort and security, and truly to her, money is just a way for her to buy more alcohol and a way for her to buy back the comfort oppression took from her. That is why Bigger gave her the money, for he knew why she liked him. He gave her money for drinks. Moreover, we can see also Bessie and Bigger's relationships transcend into the feminist lens, in that they are required to act as though their physical state of sex can be seen at all times. Bessie must be weepy and submissive when she has alcohol. Bigger must be manly and internalize all of his emotions. Even with Bigger, he thinks that with the alcohol, a black man can have a chance, though we all know that it's just the alcohol talking, not him. Although both of them depend upon this symbol, the femme lens causes them to act different ways that they are dictated by the society and cultural normalities. Because after all, these black boys never get a chance.
While Bigger doesn't act as hostile or reserved around Bessie as he does with his family, he still wears a mask, concealing his fear and shame, always covered by a mask. He never lets her know how he feels. In the pale yellow sheen of the street lamp, they faced each other. Bessie is an outward expression of Bigger's fear. She represents all that he is afraid of, including being fearful of taking the money, but his id makes him do it. Bigger must conceal himself. Just as Jung said, humans form a mask which conceals their true form. As Bessie shows his internal struggle with what he felt, his cool external features were the result of a long ingraining of male-female and black-white stereotypes. There are a tremendous amount of objects that have symbolic meaning to him as he transitions into his life within the white world. These would include the gun, brick, white hand, and knife. All of these objects that he both utilizes and fears at the same time. He comes to the same deep realization with each object that he must use them to progress himself, although they symbolize what he fears most. Fear renders him unable to comprehend his own doubts and frailties of being. These being unequal with the gun, unmanly with the brick, constantly oppressed by the white hand, and gripped by a false sense of security provided by the knife, and how it aids in the killing of Mary but cannot finish the job, ironically forcing him to rely on the white man's tool to symbolically behead white society. These objects are the dehumanization existing by industrialism. They are the way he transitions, but ultimately they are his downfall and weakness. They expose his hubris of need for power, control, and equality. All of these objects provide personal symbols for him to relate to. These are vehicles for shame and fear and hate, but also existentialism, in that one can have all the physical help in the world, but they will only end in the same way they began. This is the cyclical nature of life and the unchangeable fate of certainty. This also relates to a tenet of Jung's that states, personal symbols uncover the true individual.
As we watched fearfully, ashes were piling up in the furnace, and Bigger piled lies on top of lies. He and the furnace were parallels to each other, as they both consumed that which brought them fear and turned them into useless anxiety and false confidence that, in the end, betrayed their secrets. The furnace, suffusing a red glare over everything, as equivalent to Bigger's eyes red from sleep and alcohol, represents the Jung-based archetype of the color red. In Wright's depictions, the red eyes and red embers symbolize Bigger's subconscious knowledge of his inability to escape oppression, which is why all fluctuations of the color are revolved around his failed attempt at subconsciously undermining the white race by telling them that he had killed a rich white girl. Further illuminating the catalytic grip of the flames have on Bigger, the fire singing in the furnace ignites a white-hot passion in him. The archetypal meaning of the metal depicting his ironclad bond to the furnace, as it now balances him between exposure and safety, between shame and pride.
We Wear the Mask by Paul Laurence Dunbar is the epitomization of Bigger. His mask shields him from the white community. He smiles, nods politely, and stammers out, "Yes'm," at anyone's request. This mask is his security, his comfort, and his only means of survival in the white world.
White. White images are shown within this novel consistently throughout that symbolize many differing ideas. The dissonance and juxtaposition between the fact that he was black and she was white shows the idea of purity changing into one of blindness. The constant reminder of differences between black and white is reciprocated in the societal ideals. These are the reasons as to what they define themselves as. For Bigger, the thought and image of the whole blind world which had made him ashamed and afraid fell away when he killed Mary. No longer did his blackness define who he was. Being black was a dangerous burden compared to the sanctity of whiteness. All of these whites are tall, white, and silent in their blindness to the surrounding area. They have no magnitude of the effects of their control over the black communities. The Dalton home is the epitome of this. Mrs. Dalton reverberates the naturalism ideal that humans are fragile in the face of their environment. She cannot deal with the sight of her husband's being, so she turns to her blindness, both physical and metaphorical. Her futile realization results in freedom from her solitude of horrific actions against the black community. The white symbols are not doing full justice to the idea that whiteness is not pure but an ironic symbol, that on the inside they may not be so pure and clean. But the image one portrays, such as the Daltons do, can blind others to their true intentions.
The most important white symbol, however, is Kate, the big white cat that Bigger feels betrayed by throughout the book. She follows him about, her green eyes, pools of accusation and guilt, gazing past him and into his soul, exposing his excessive guilt and shame. She watches him carefully, acting as a physical representation of Bigger's perception of the white community. He feels as though whites, who were looking for him, never took their eyes off of him. They were constantly analyzing his every move. This paranoia pushes Bigger's levels of fear and shame over the edge, pushing him to wish to kill the cat, instead of letting her betray him.
Like the cat, time never stops moving. It acts as a flat circle. Several times, Bigger looked at the clock in disbelief as it continued to tick, 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 unwaveringly throughout every scene. The clock exists as a constant reminder to Bigger that, as existentialism explains, there is no higher being that he can wait for to set things straight. He, the problem boy, must learn to ignore the restraints of the human construct of time and instead take responsibility for his actions. In Book 2, he slowly starts to embrace this existentialist tenet, wanting to say publicly that he had done it. He had killed Mary Dalton. The clock is metaphorically ticking, however, on his ability to do this, as he progressively grows more agitated and begins to lie more and more, avoiding the truth. Furthermore, the clock represents the idea that, in the fight for social equality for Negroes, the time is never going to be considered right by the majority to combat oppression. Bigger must follow existentialism and realize that if he acts with time as a supreme being, he cannot grasp the freedom that he has. Once he has fully immersed himself in existentialism, he will be like a man reborn, released from the confines of time as humanity sees it, embracing freedom after despair. Clocks also play a significant role for Bigger before he connects with existentialism in the concept of stopping the pulse of time. Time always seemed to be running out on Bigger, keeping him from living existentially without it. The most prominent symbol in Book 2 of Native Son, however, is weather. As the weather begins to change from a few big white clouds drifting to a time when huge wet flakes of snow floated down slowly, Wright depicts the parallels between the shifting weather and the shifting emotions of Bigger throughout the story. When the weather is white, bright, and optimistic, Bigger is confident in his ability to fool the police and the rest of the world. Bigger feels that his crime is an anchor weighing him safely in time, in a place where he feels in control. In the dark, however, Bigger feels uncertain. His shame and guilt and fear consumes him, impressing upon him the flaws in his plans, the imperfections in his life, and his inability to make sound decisions. The snow moved in no given direction, but filled the world with a vast white storm of flying powder that impressed upon him how he could not escape the fate he made for himself. He is unable to remove himself from the white whirlwind of fate that encapsulates him.
Seeing the sightless. The white woman in a white house with white walls and a white cat. She cannot see but is heard quite clearly. She cannot know but senses it. I'm right here. Why can't you see me? Why can't you hear me but you can be heard? What makes you so special? The black man in the black house with black walls and a black cat. He can see but is not heard. He knows but can never sense. He is right here. Why can't you hear him? Why can't he hear you but never speak? What makes him so special?